There are a lot of reasons you might want to interact with your computer using a command line interface, and there are a lot of reasons that you might choose the bash shell to do that. But whatever your motivation is, one of the first things you're going to have to do is just learn how to find your way around your file system in bash and get some basic information about files. So in this short video, I want to do two things. First, I just want to give you a brief introduction to working with files in the bash shell and highlight a couple of important features that apply to anything you use the bash shell for. So let's jump straight into a bash shell. If you're running a Linux operating system, you've probably got a couple of terminals available that can run the bash shell. If you're on Mac OS X, you'll find the terminal application in the utilities folder inside your applications folder. If you're running a Windows operating system, you probably want to install Git Bash, which has a nice terminal with bash installed. But on all of these, bash runs identically. So I'm in a bash shell right now in this terminal, and maybe the first question you want to ask is, where am I? It's not so obvious when you're looking at a terminal, where you are in the file system, and in bash the way you do that is to print the working directory, or pwd. The reply you get to that shows you a /separated series of folders. So this means I'm in the folder named video inside the folder named users. If you want to change to a different working directory, that's command in bash is cd for change directory, and you can give it the name of the directory you want to change to. If I wanted to change, let's say, to be on the desktop of this user, if I mistype the name, it's going to tell me, sorry, there's no such file or directory. So I'll use one of the key features of bash for everyday use. I'll type capital D, ES, and then I'm going to hit the tab key on my keyboard. And bash will complete that file name for me because that's the only match in my file system here that DES could lead to. When I hit return, I don't see any result, but I'm in a different working directory now. There was no error. If I wanted to verify that, again, I could print the working directory, and I'll see that I'm now in the desktop folder, inside the video folder, inside the users folder. If I want to see the contents of that folder, I can use the ls command, which means list, and that'll list everything inside that directory. There's one item here called work files. If I did a long listing of it, that's what the -l addition means, then I can see a lot of information about who owns it and file permissions. In this case, the key thing I'm interested in is that leading D means that's a directory. So I could change directory again and go inside the work files directory. And now if I listed the files there, I'll see that there are a whole bunch of files, in fact, in that directory. And this is exactly what I would see if I were looking at a graphic interface to my file system. On the desktop for this user, there's a folder called work files, and it has a whole bunch of files there. We're looking at exactly the same information using the bash shell. How did I know to use that -l option to get more information from the list? Well, one of the first commands you certainly want to get familiar with in bash is called man. It's the manual page, the reference manual for a given command. So if I looked at man ls, I'll see that ls lists the contents of a directory, and it's got a whole slew of options, each of which are explained down here. And if I looked at the entry for a particular listing, I'd see that -l means listed in the long format, for example. So that's an easy way to learn about what you have available. These files, in fact, are a list of vocabulary items for 10 chapters of a first semester language course. And if I wanted to find out more information about the contents, what that man page actually used, if you notice, I can hit the space bar and progress through it, sort of browse through it, scroll through it. It's actually using a command called more, and I can apply that to a file as well. And in similar fashion, I can space bar to just scroll through that file and see the contents of that file. I could get more information about a file using a program called WC, which stands for word count. That was a long file we just looked at. We get a brief count of the number of, various things. Let's read the man page about that. And we find out it tells us words, lines, and characters in a file. And I've already read the man page, so I know that it has a listing where if I run WC with the L flag, I'll get just the number of lines. So Chapter 1 has 63 lines, and each line is one vocabulary item, so I've got 63 vocabulary items to study in Chapter 1. I could, of course, tediously go through every single chapter and find out how many vocabulary items there are and see how much they add up to get an estimate of what's ahead of me this semester. But I could also use an important feature of the bash shell, which is another variation of file name completion. The asterisk is a wildcard that means match any character. So this command says, give me the word count listing of lines for every file that starts with ch and ends with tsv. And it will do that for each file, and handily, in this case, also gives me a total. So 190 items across those different files. Seems a little strange that there's 0 items in Unit 6, so I'm going to use a different command. Cat means concatenate. It's short for concatenate, and it simply spills out, dumps out the contents of a file, and sure enough, there are no contents on that file. I can also use cat without a file name, and it will just echo what I have, whatever I type, and Control D will end my input. In this case, what's going on is that the cat program, instead of getting its input from a named file, is taking as its input whatever I'm typing. And that's part of a more general phenomenon in the bash shell called input-output redirection. In this case, let's illustrate it with this right angle bracket. The greater than sign means send the output of this file onto a named file of some sort. So I'm going to enter some input, and instead of just echoing it on the screen, it's going to be sent to the file named notes.txt. And Control D to end my input. Now I should have, well, I can actually use cat on that too, a new file called notes.txt, and its contents are exactly what I typed. Now that may seem like a kind of unnecessary feature for cat because, after all, I could have just opened a text editor and typed something into a file just as easily. But the operator of the input-output redirection that I want to illustrate next is a more interesting one. The vertical line, or pipe, connects two commands together so that the output of the first command becomes the input of the second command. Let's consider something like this. If I wanted to look at the word count, again, of all of the files that start with ch, I get a list of those. If I look at a single file, I see, again, just that amount. If I use that, let's see, here's an alternate way I could come up with that total number rather than making WC work on all of those files. What if I were to cat all of the files starting with ch? That's going to just concatenate them all together. They went through very, very fast. If I use the pipe operator, that means everything that I've catted together is going to become the input to the next command. So if I use more as the command that is being fed this input, I can now scroll through all 10 chapters worth of vocabulary. I'm also now going to use another feature of bash that's very important. It maintains a history of every command you've used, and I'm going to use the up arrow to I'm going to do the up arrow right now, and it's going to read back through my previous commands. I'm going to take this command I just used and modify it just a little bit. I'm going to use the output of catting all of those files together and count how many lines they are. And there's a simple and direct way to count the number of vocabulary items I have in all of the files in that folder that's follow this name pattern of beginning with ch. At this point, I'm going to change directory once more, but this time I'm not going to name a directory to change into. If you do that, the default choice is simply, it takes you back to your home directory. So here I am at the users/video directory where I started, and that's the quick overview of navigating your files with bash. So just to recap a couple of important points, find out where you are using pwd to print the working directory, change directory using cd, list contents of a directory with ls, and wc is a handy program for counting words and lines and other things in a file. We saw in addition that no matter what you're using bash for, it supports tab completion when you're interactively working in a terminal. It has a history of everything you've done that you can easily cycle back through and reuse commands or modify commands slightly. And it allows you to redirect input and output, and that can be very powerful in combining little teeny commands together to create something more complex, such as counting lines in a whole bunch of files by piping them through wc-l. That's a few minutes of quick intro to bash. You'll find infinite resources on the internet, tutorials, reference manuals, everything else. But these general features are going to be useful to you no matter what you end up using your bash shell to accomplish.